Let's look together to the book of Deuteronomy. You've heard me share before that Deuteronomy is actually one very long sermon. Moses was near the end of his life and he preached this very long sermon. It's quite likely he was sitting and the people were standing during the talk. That's the way you keep people awake. These verses I'm going to share with you are what I believe to be the main thesis of the whole message. This is him giving a summary. He's getting near the end, not at quite the end. But this is what he's been saying for chapters and chapters. He's stopping to take his breath kind of here and summarize things. And he says this, beginning with verse 1 of chapter 28. If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above the nations of the earth. All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. You will be blessed in the city and blessed in the country. The fruit of your womb will be blessed, the crops of your land and the young of your livestock, the calves of your herds and the lambs of your flocks. Your basket and your kneading trough will be blessed. You will be blessed when you come in and blessed when you go out. The Lord will grant that the enemies who rise up against you will be defeated before you. Then you will come at me from one direction, but they will come at you from one direction, but then they will flee from you in 7 directions. The Lord will send blessings on your barns and on everything you put your hand to. The Lord your God will bless you in the land he is giving you. The Lord will establish you as his holy people, as he promised you on an oath, if you keep the commandments of your Lord and walk in obedience to him. Then all the peoples of the earth will see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they will fear you. The Lord will grant you abundant prosperity in the fruit of your womb, the young of your livestock, and the crops on the ground, in the land he swore to the ancestors he gave you. The Lord will open up the heavens, the storehouses of his bounty, to send rain to the land in season and bless all the work of your hands. You will lend to many nations, but you will borrow from none. The Lord will make you the head, not the tail. If you will pay attention to the commandments of the Lord your God that I give you this day and carefully follow them, you will be at the top, never at the bottom. Do not turn aside from any of the commandments I give you today to the right or to the left, following the other gods and serving them. Beginning a sermon series on stewardship called What is Stewardship? And inviting you today that, inviting you and me, all of us, to grow in our giving and invite all of us to grow in understanding of what this word is, stewardship. Stewardship, what comes to mind when you hear that word? I thought this week there's 2 times stewardship comes up in conversations. One, if someone doesn't want the church spending money on something, and I've been one of those who use it this way. That's not good stewardship of God's money. It's not a good idea. And then the other term is stewardship equals the preacher wants you to tithe. Yeah. But let's get a biblical definition about what is stewardship. And I think I've shared this with you before. As teenagers, I would ride home from church from my brother who's 14 years older than me during this time of the year when the preacher would talk about stewardship. And we were so courageous because we were alone. We were so bold in our opinions because there was no one there to disagree with us in the car and say, I am so sick of the preacher talking about money for a whole month of the year. And we'd go home and try to lean into that argument at lunch. And then Mom would always say, well, wasn't that a good point he made about this? Or a good point about that? His mom would make jelly, and she would make 9 pints and set one aside to give to the preacher. Wasn't that a beautiful picture? I can remember it now. But then I made a shift. I started reading the Bible. I realized the Bible has a lot to say about stewardship and giving. Some people, you may have heard this. I may be the first to say it if you haven't heard. The word stewardship is nowhere in the Bible. By the way, the word Trinity is also nowhere in the Bible. Don't ever fall for an argument where someone says, well, that's not really true because the word isn't in the Bible. Okay, it's not. The word steward is in the Bible 12 times. Yeah, I checked it. But the idea of stewardship runs from Genesis chapter 2 all the way through the Bible. The idea of stewardship is there, and I do believe it is one of the main ideas, messages of the Bible. God calls us to stewardship. So I want to share with you on stewardship these next 4 weeks, and I hope you will please be here for as many services that you are in town, because these messages are going to be positive. They're going to be exciting. And for lack of a better way to describe it, they're going to be a complimentary. God's paying you a compliment when he invites you into stewardship. This is a picture that I have for the backgrounds of the slide. I know it's a picture over the picture. I'm sorry, I should have whited out the slide behind the slide. But do you see the little man in the picture? Lower left-hand corner, there's a man standing on a little knoll. Some of you see it, some of you don't. Okay, that's a better screen projector. I think you can see better over that way, or maybe it's the sun coming in. But that is a picture of stewardship. You are that person. And God's saying, I'm giving you all this. Actually, I'm loaning it to you. Now take care of it. Take care of it. That's the picture of what stewardship is. Real quickly, definition of stewardship. This is definition number 3 in a dictionary I used. Definition 1 is an airline steward, stewardess, person that waits on people on buses and planes. Definition 2 is an event steward. The person who runs huge events is called the steward. Number 3 is related to us, is a person employed to manage another person's property, especially a large house or estate. Synonyms are estate manager, agent, overseer, custodian, caretaker. Historical is the word reeve. My mother's maiden name was Reeves from England. A person who would be given the task of managing an estate was called a reeve. I just learned this week where my family's name came from. I knew it was British, but yeah, so it means manager. Number 4, a person whose responsibility is to take care of something. Farmers pride themselves on being the stewards of the countryside. Those that look after something that really isn't theirs, but they take that responsibility as it were. Number 2, if you flip it to a verb, it means to manage or look after something. I'm going to hire you to steward my property. Take care of. Look for of. Whoop, wrong button. So how does this medieval occupation in the Bible come together? Well, thank you for asking. I really appreciate that question because I am dying to answer it. Let's see what the Bible has to say about that. And thinking about, in my experience, the greatest definition of successful land stewardship was the first church I served, the community of Shemuckla. There was a ruthless man about the turn of the century, put a rowboat in a wagon. He took what was basically the bottom of what is Santa Rosa County, Florida, rode up to the Alabama line, about down the middle. He rode to the Escambia River. He wrote the Department of Interior and said, this land is useless. I've looked over it. I had to be in a boat the whole time. You get that? And he told them they should sell it to him at a low price. So the man bought half of what's Santa Rosa County, Florida, for practically nothing. Well, Mr. Skinner was a mean man. Some of the people that were in my church were actually descendants of Native Americans who hid in the swamp during the Trail of Tears time, and they were still there, and he was ruthless and a bandit, really, trying to make them leave, but they didn't. And then he fell upon hard times, and he sold all that property to a guy named John Pace. You ever heard of Pace, Florida? It's named after him. And he took half of Santa Rosa County, and he knew it was too big of an area to farm himself. So it's funny, he brought a bunch of people from Coffee County, Alabama, and Dale County, where I'm from, to invited them to come over there, and you could farm the land. And if you were good at farming, you would buy a little bit of the land over time. And there, a lot of the people in my church were descendants of those people. I know sharecropping is a racket, and it rips people off, and they say you work for half of nothing and all that. He actually created a sharecropping type agreement that was successful. He was a very prosperous farm operator and eventually sold off almost all his land. Actually, in 1996, he sold the last piece of land to a farmer there for cash. It was a little different world. But he gradually bought half the county and gradually sold it by letting people be stewards of the property. One of the greatest stories of stewardship I've ever heard of, because usually those were, forced to lose situations. So to be called a steward by God is a huge compliment from God. A lot of times when we start thinking about it, we feel intimidated and worried. Think about the parable of the talents. At the end of it, the master says to the successful servant, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in a few things, and I will put you in charge of many. Come and share in your master's happiness." Working for God, yeah, it's pretty scary. But let's don't focus on the negative. Let's focus on the possibilities. It is a compliment. And the more God gives you, the more you steward well, I believe the more God will give you to steward well. And there is this business principle called the Patero principle that says you should be doing what you're good at in the workplace. And that gave rise to what are called the HR departments now, where they try to find people in the right positions and bring them together. Now, sometimes you just have to do what you can to take care of those you love. But as much as you can, you need to try to do for what you're good at. But sometimes you have to do for those you love. And then there is accountability. But who is accountability for? It's accountability to God. And yeah, I really do believe that. I am accountable for God for my life that He has loaned to me. I'm accountable to God for my family. He has loaned to me my marriage and my children. And in the churches I am called to serve, I feel a great deal of accountability to them. Now, the hard part for me is balancing the three. I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to get too focused on one and neglect the other two. I'm from a family where working was highly valued, and I can work so much to try to be a part of my family or to do well at the church, and then I ruin my health. But I'm not being a good steward then, because God puts it all together and wants me to balance that together. All these things in your life and my life, they're gifts. Really, they're loans. And that takes me on to this next point here. The reality is you're really just borrowing stuff from God. Have you heard that saying, don't loan anything you really like? You ever heard that saying, don't loan out anything you really like? You ever had a bad experience with loaning things out? Fear, a problem I face sometimes in churches is old pianos. Not that I dislike pianos. I love that piano right there. It's great. Carol, you're great. I love you playing that piano. But people have, and if you're one of those people, please don't be offended. I know you've got good motivation, but it creates a problem. People sometimes like to take wore-out pianos and give them to churches. And that creates two problems. Number one, you can't play them because they're worn out. Number two, they're heavy, big, and they get in the way. And so another church I was at, nobody related, this is miles and miles away, Somebody said, hey, I got so-and-so's piano. She was one of the people at the church at the turn of the century, and you need to have it at the church. No, we don't. Lord, give thanks to God. He gave me the gift of diplomacy in that situation. I carefully managed it, and it turned out that we would give the piano to this lady's niece in Atlanta, Georgia. How wore out was the piano? Carol, have you ever seen this? One of the little foot pedals was completely wore off. You have? Okay, I've never seen a piano that they actually wore the metal pedal off of a piano. So we only one condition. I'm doing negotiating here. Can you get it loaded in a trailer? I can get some men to load it. We load it. And one of the guys that helped was a truck driver, and I brought my tie-down straps, and he attached it safely in there. The piano went to Atlanta. Praise the Lord, it was all good. I want my tie-down straps back. Contact the family. Can I get my tie-down straps back? 3 times I asked. Finally, I come to church. This church building was not locked, and there were tie-down straps on a table sitting there for me. They weren't mine. They were the cheapest, most worn-out ones in the world. Yeah, I got over it. I get picked about that story. I threw them away. If you love something, don't loan it out, right? But God has loaned you a lot of stuff. Psalm 24:1, the earth and everything in it belongs to God. So whatever you have in your life, it is a loan. God has loaned it to you. So who do you loan your good stuff to? People that you trust. So God is saying, hey, I trust you. I trust you lots and lots. There's one thing God decided you could have. A gift he gave to you, and it is your free will, your choice. And then we were played by Satan. Sorry to say, all of us, even the most socialized and morally upright appearing, we've all been deceived by Satan and taken by him. But Jesus wasn't okay with that, so he came and he died on the cross. So we say in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, you are not your own. You were bought at a price. You don't have everything. You are bought back by God. And if you haven't read the book in a long time, I'd encourage you to do it. The book of Hosea is the story of a prophet of God who is called by God to marry a very adulterous woman. He marries her. He has children with her, and then she leaves him for another man. And then he has to go. God says, go find her. And turns out she is for sale as a slave. And I did the math, shekels to dollars, okay? He pays about $75, $80 to buy his wife back. Her name is Gomer. Beautiful story of the love of God for people. God says, I want you to show the people, and the people of Israel, and Hosea actually was northern kingdom, they were very, very into idolatry. And he said, I want you to show the people how much you love them. Go buy her back. And he does. Based on who you are and who you're serving as a steward, all work is sacred when it is done for God. I have a memory verse here that our children are learning right now. And I'm real pleased how many have come to me and told me they know it. And if you don't know this verse, you need to. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord. All work is sacred when you do it for the Lord. We're about to have communion here, and it is a sacred moment and a sacred meal. But I want you to know that all work is sacred when it's done for the Lord. We're living in a time of tumultuous conflict in America, but let me tell you, one of the things America needs to rediscover is what's called the Protestant work ethic. And nobody's talking about that. Whatever God gives you to do, you do it for God. And if God has gifted you to shine shoes, God has called you to shine shoes. No work is beneath God. He's given it all to us. And so we must set aside our arrogance and do that boring work. Every one of us. We do it for God. This celebrity culture is leading us astray. Remember Colgate toothpaste? It's got a better name now, but it used to be called Colgate. Yeah, there used to be toothpaste called Colgate. This guy named Wilbur Colgate invented toothpaste in the 1800s. He was from a poor immigrant family, and he sought wisdom and talked to his pastor about a bunch of things about what was God's will. And at one point, the pastor asked Wilbur Colgate, "What is it you're good at?" He said, "Well, there's one thing I'm good at. I can make soap. I can make it well, and it works." And then the pastor said, "You must be called for that." It's a longer story. Also, he committed a tithe because he was so good at making toothpaste. He's one of the pioneers of the toothpaste idea. He was able to take and give large percentages of his income to God toward the end of his life. Colgate, do what God has gifted you to do. And then the overseer, he is generous. That is God. And he wants you to be, there's a typo on the bulletin if you're following there. It's supposed to say, he wants you to be that way in your heart and the medium of exchange. Remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, because God loves a cheerful giver. As we move into true Christian discipleship, you and I will become more generous. So finally, going back to Deuteronomy, you're to be the head, not the tail. God, our overseer, he values every one of us. There's nobody that's not important to him. Let me close with this verse. You're not your own. You were bought with a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies.